Hello, 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 friends. It's me, Harry, and yes, I'm talking about this again because there has been an update. There is movement in the discourse on whether Rishi Sunak is English or not. And yes, the answer is still no. No, he is not English. Nothing that anybody says could make him English. If he were to have children with an English woman, and then those children exclusively had children with English people for a good few generations, maybe then you could say some of his descendants were English. But given, as I have described previously, Englishness is defined by your ancestry, at least ethnic Englishness. Obviously, you can talk about cultural or civic Englishness, even though English is not a civic category. Until the cows come home, that does not change the fact that Rishi Sunak is not, has not been, and will never be English. Simple as. But the discourse surrounding this has developed. Now, of course, the initial statements when made by somebody like Fraser Nelson on the Trigonometry podcast sparked a lot of discourse, particularly around us, but also around all of the usual suspects, like the New Statesman, saying, of course, Rishi Sunak is English. And it's very, very interesting, the argument that they take here, which is, well, you know, he was born here, he was socialized here, therefore he's English. Again, many arguments could be made. There's no point in making them because these are all bad faith and dishonest arguments as an attempt to erase our identities. People like David Aaronovitch challenged Kissin, saying, am I English, Konstantin? Well, I don't know that much about Aaronovitch, but that's not an English surname. In fact, that's an Eastern European surname. So I would assume that he's actually Eastern European in ethnicity or Jewish. So that means, no, you're not English, unless, of course, you have descended enough generations down from English couples having children with one another, that maybe then I would be able to determine whether you are English or not if your surname is just a holdover from a very, very distant ancestor, in the same way that Tolkien I would consider an Englishman, despite the fact that his name derives from German immigrants who settled in England in the 17th century. By the time you get to Tolkien, the name is a holdover, but he himself has become English ancestrally, mainly because, again, it is ancestral, which means it is primarily genetic, which people don't like to talk about, but that is the truth of it. And it's funny when you go through here, because no matter what argument they're making, if they're trying to be honest about it, and these people are very rarely honest about it, but there is the point where they decide that actually you're right. Actually, you're correct here. Like they admit here, if Kissin said that Sunak isn't a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, WASP, a generally American term that has never had much currency in the UK, that's true that term hasn't had currency in the UK, but you could just say of Anglo-Saxon descent, which means English, he would be on safer ground, at least in a descriptive sense. In fact, this is really what is meant by ethnic English, because it is undeniably true that most, all, English people belong in that category and have an ancestral lineage on these isles that goes back centuries. Okay, you've conceded my point. So thank you very much. You then go on to say all of this nonsense about it being a nationality, a multinational union that is Britain, even before mass migration within Britain, an Englishman knew that what an Englishman was and what a Scot was, etc., etc. So he's conceded my point there, so I declare complete victory. Then you have Kenan Malik, who definitely doesn't have a horse in this race, saying, can a brown Hindu be English? Most Britons say yes. So why do so many on the right say no? Now, Britons is an interesting term to use here, because Britons could also refer to the people who've descended from the indigenous Britons who were on these isles even prior to the Anglo-Saxons arriving, and that would also include all English people, because we intermixed with them when we arrived here, meaning that all English people have a hefty Celtic component to their ancestry and genetics as well. So it's interesting that he used that term, but it's about the slippery use of language, showing that these people really do just think that words don't actually mean anything. Words don't actually mean anything, because if they had hard and fast definitions, then you would have to be honest in the way that you discuss them. Whereas it's much easier to be slippery if you just use words like they mean whatever you feel like they mean at the time for the sake of your own argument. So I'm not even going to address what this article says, because it will be absolute rubbish. finally, we have this. This one's quite funny. The Times of India asking, why is Rishi Sunak's English identity being questioned? Why would the Times of India be discussing this if Rishi Sunak was just an Englishman being told by other Englishmen that he's not English? That would be a rather unusual thing for the Times of India to comment on, don't you think? And I'll move on. And the discussion has got to the point where Fraser Nelson, always up for a beating, has decided to jump back in, supporting, because Fraser Nelson is a good conservative, supporting the words of Sadiq Khan, one of the greatest enemies this country has ever had, a snake, a enemy within our own gates, who said that, are they saying that because the colour of your skin will never be pale, will never be English? No. Again, Sadiq, obviously you are a brown man, but still, I have seen Englishmen, Welshmen, Scotsmen, who when they go into the sun for too long in the summer or when they're on holiday can get to pretty close a shade of brown as you are right now. Does this mean that they are not ethnically Welsh, ethnically English, ethnically Scottish? Does it mean that if an Englishman born of English parents whose ancestry can be traced back in these lands for generations were born with some kind of genetic abnormality that meant that his skin was as dark or even darker than yours, that it means that he wouldn't be English? No. It is about genetics and it is about ancestry. This is not a hate term. This is not a hateful way of seeing the world. This is an accurate and objective way of seeing the world. And if anything, at this point, it's a defensive way of seeing the world. Because as Josh says, oftentimes human interaction comes down to group-based decision-making around resource acquisition. You recognize yourself as being a part of a group. I recognize myself as being part of a group, and these groups look out for themselves, and there are only a limited amount of resources to go on. So if my group can get more resources than your group, that means that I am safer than you are. It means I'm in a better off position than you are. If you try to tell me I'm not actually part of a group, while you implicitly say that you know that you are part of your own group, that makes it much easier for you to acquire resources, because working in a team is much better than working as an individual. It is as simple as that. It is a group-based evolutionary strategy, and what this is a very sneaky and very snake-like way of trying to undermine the opposing group's identity so that you can acquire more resources. This is why many of the people of Sadiq Khan's ethnic background come over here, set up their own separate enclaves and economies where they only trade with themselves and also scrounge off of our benefits, which I pay for. And then, sadly, I have to take it back. One of my previous videos on this, I said that Rishi Sunak has not said that he is English and has never denied being Indian. While the second part, he's never denied being Indian, is still true, Fraser Nelson has posted this clip of Rishi Sunak being asked himself if he is English, to which he has this response.
I mean, of course I'm English. Born here, brought up here. I mean, of course I'm English. Actually, funnily enough, I think when we were doing that first one of these some time back, you asked about the Tebet test, and I think you did. I did. It struck me actually, funnily enough, that this debate it moves well beyond that, because
who cares what else that he has to say, because it's all dishonest. Because really, what you need to be paying attention to there is not what he is saying, but his body language. I do not care about whatever this Tebet test is. I do not care, as he says later on, that he owns a Labrador. Apparently that makes you English to some, because to some, Englishness is just a skin suit where you can wear the aesthetics of an Englishman and automatically be English, which is not how it has worked or will ever work. But notice how squirmy and squeamish his body language is, because ultimately Rishi Sunak knows he's an outsider, and he knows that he has taken advantage of this country. He's extracted a great deal of resources, a great deal of prestige, and a great deal of advantage from this country. And so what we're seeing here is him realizing that the game is up. He's been found out. And that if he isn't accepted as being English, well, then perhaps the Englishmen of this country will not be as eager for him to continue to leech off of their resources. I was never happy for him to be Prime Minister. Many people I know were never happy for him to be Prime Minister. Many people in India were very happy for him to be Prime Minister, and I wonder why that would be if he had just been another Englishman like you or me, which tells the lie straightforwardly, doesn't it? Anyway, so remember, he's not English. Sadiq Khan isn't English. If you are English, that means you are of Anglo-Saxon heritage. Your ancestry can be traced back in this country for generations upon generations, potentially even thousands of years back to the original Brittonic Celts who were here. That is as simple as it gets. This isn't a hard question, and it's stupid that Rishi Sunak has even commented on it because he had nothing to gain by trying to claim that he is English, because he is not.